Yeah, it's really wonderful to be here. And I've also been told that I can only move in this box right here to here. So I'm going to try to, I tend to wander some. And thanks you all for being here on a Friday afternoon. And it's beautiful outside. So kudos to everyone. I know it's getting towards the end of the semester. When do you all wrap up? It's probably in the next couple of weeks, I would imagine. Yeah, it's the same at Warren Wilson. And we're all pretty cooked down there in Asheville, North Carolina. I suspect y'all might be the same here. So real kudos for you for being here. And thanks to the folks online who are joining us as well. I will do my best to make this as entertaining and useful and interesting as possible. I may also ask you once in a while to talk to somebody next to you. So that way we can have a little bit of interactivity, even in this sort of more of a lecture direct instruction space. Oh, and let's hope this thing moves. This is always what happens. We did test all of these things. Maybe it needs to be turned on. If not, I know how to just move it by doing the arrow button or not. Okay. That's why we have our IT folks here to help out with these things. I had a nice chance to just have a lunch with some of the folks and get to know Montgomery College a little bit better. And it's really interesting. I don't know how many people know, but some students and faculty from the honors program come down to Warren Wilson over the summer to take part in our Swananoa Gathering, which is a summer-long series where students come and they take about a week's worth of classes in folk music. And that's been a long-standing tradition for Warren Wilson. It's really lovely to know that we have that connection with Montgomery College, and hopefully more connections to come. Look at that. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so introductions and overview. I want to start out with this story. This is, see, I got to watch how far I walk here. This is a friend of mine, Armin. He is at the University of Alabama, and I served as a kind of like an experiential learning coach for the University of Alabama for one of their quality enhancement programs. And how that would work with me with Armin is I would sit down with these faculty and they'd say, here's the challenge I'm trying to address in my classroom. Here's how I'm trying to make it more active or more experiential. And we would kind of talk that through, and then I would leave. They would go try half of the class with this new strategy. And then I would come back about halfway through the semester and ask how it was going. And we would go from there. So with Armin, it was this class called Concrete Materials Lab. I am not a scientist. I'm not an engineer. So this one was brand new to me. I had to say, Armin, tell me exactly what's happening in a concrete materials lab. And he said, well, what's frustrating me is the students show up and they're not very engaged, and they kind of go through this lab. And once they get everything done, they just sort of hand in their worksheet and they walk out the door. And it just doesn't feel like they're just kind of walking through the motions. It doesn't feel like they're very engaged at all. And I said, so what are you asking them to do? And he said, well, they come in and I give them a worksheet and it shows them how to make concrete. And then they break up into these lab groups and they put all of the materials together and they make their concrete, and then they're done. And I said, Armin, what if you didn't give them the worksheet? And Armin looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, but then they wouldn't know how to make concrete. And I said, exactly. And he said, this is a crazy idea. It would be a disaster. There would be failure everywhere. And I said, exactly. And so we talked a little bit more, and he was willing to give it a shot. So fast forward about 6-7 weeks, I come back, meeting with all the faculty. Armin comes in the door, and he was like, and I said, Armin, how did the concrete materials lab go? And he's like, it was amazing. He said they came in and there was no worksheet, and they looked confused, and they got into their groups, and it was just chaos everywhere. They had all these questions, and they were making really bad concrete. Some of it was too wet and some of it was too dry. And he's like, and then they made the mistake, and he's giggling now, right? They made the mistake that they could Google it. But what they don't understand is it totally depends on the material you're using. So Google doesn't help you. And he went through this whole thing. He said, and then finally they all got together with me in the lab, and we just talked about like what went wrong. And they had all these questions and they were on fire. And then I said, we're going to do the lab again next week. right? And now that you know a little bit more about how to make concrete, and that sent Armin off on his journey of experiential learning as an engineer. And he began to really think about a concept we're going to talk about today, experience before label, and infuse that into everything that he was doing in engineering. And he wound up presenting on this at regional conferences. And it's really shaped the way he approaches his pedagogy and his teaching. And so I always like to start with Armin's story because it doesn't have to be something big, y'all, right? It doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, I have to tear up every syllabus that I have and redo every single course to make it more active, more experiential. Sometimes it can just be the most small change that you might think of, like simply not giving the student a worksheet at the beginning of the class. And sometimes those small steps, those small changes can then lead you on a journey where you might find yourself teaching in very different ways, either next week or next year or 5 years from now. So I really want to present what I'm going to be talking about today as a series of tools and options and things for you to consider. I'm not going to stand up here and say this is the only or the best way to teach. But hopefully we can have a good exploration of this really amazing universe called experiential learning and how it might fit in your context, whether you're, and I should ask, are there co-supporting staff here in addition to faculty? Anybody here? A few, great, yeah, lovely. On our campus, we call them campus co-educators, and I really love that, so, okay. Long quote, but bear with me. This is one of my favorites from Margaret Wheatley, and I'm gonna have to turn around so I can read it. No one person or perspective can give us the answers to the problems of today. Paradoxically, we can only find those answers by admitting we don't know. We have to be willing to let go of our certainty and expect ourselves to be confused for a time. We weren't trained to admit we don't know. Most of us were taught to sound certain and confident, to state our opinion as if it were true. We haven't been rewarded for being confused or for asking more questions rather than giving quick answers. But the world is quite complexing now. We don't live in those sweet, slow days where life felt predictable, when we actually knew what to do next. We live in a complex world. We often don't know what's going on, and we won't be able to understand its complexity unless we spend more time in not knowing. And I really love this quote because I think it's at the kind of philosophical core of experiential learning, is this notion that in uncertainty, and it's a lot of the theme of the book that you all have here, in uncertainty are the seeds of learning, and the seeds of the ability to engage with a world of complexity and ambiguity and make a life out of it. And that's where we're going to kind of head today. So I'm going to get us started by asking you all a little bit, and sorry that that's cut off at the end there, but if you could just find somebody next to you. We'll do this a couple of times, y'all, so I won't be annoying and make you do this a lot, but just a couple of times. Find somebody next to you. And I'm just curious, this is modeling inquiry-based learning, and you might think about how you could do this in your class, asking your students what questions they have, right? Before you even hit any content whatsoever. So think to yourself, when you walked into the room today, or when you thought about, I'd like to go to this talk today, what was on your mind? Was it a question? Was it a challenge? Was it something that you really hoped you could learn more about? So just get with one or two people next to you and just share a little bit about what you brought into the room in terms of your questions and your thoughts about this topic, okay? And if you don't know this person, introduce yourself to the person that's next to you. Okay, go. And online folks, I might suggest that you put it in the chat, and that way you guys can have a little bit of a conversation as well. Not knowing the complexity. Yeah. Statistics
I was taking my statistics class. Most of them were engineers. And he said, my best advice to you, pick one of those elective classes that don't really mean anything and get it deep. He said, the problem that we're running into is engineers. Because we have all these engineers. They've never faced failures. And they get into the work environment. And the companies know the first couple of projects they give them, they expect them to fail because of the complexity of learning to do things. He said the number of students that just totally lose it the first time that they hit that wall and realize I don't have all the answers. Even it was to a point where engineering industry, like we don't want to do. They had one of his friends who was there to the school. Yeah. It's like they just broke down, because it's like, well, I can figure this out, and I can't figure this out, and I can't do this. It is kind of interesting that. That's a great story. And I think, although virtual people can't see any of that stuff, it did dawn on me that these people are seeing it.
Yeah, thank you. So take a moment and see if you can wrap that up in your small groups. Okay. So this is probably very familiar to you, but just in case it's not, it's a classic simple tool for the toolbox. It's just called a think, pair, share. This doesn't take a lot of time, and often we can hear from some faculty who are more direct instruction in their orientation that I don't have time, I've got to get through content. That doesn't take long. Right. And remember that we're human beings, not human doers. And just the simple fact of getting a chance to talk with one another, to learn from one another, this is very supported in the learning science as well. So if you are working on a math problem, you can ask the folks to try to figure it out in pairs first and then come back. You can use clickers, lots of different ways. If you are in the STEM heavy discipline, Eric Mazur's work at Harvard is a great example of if you have a large lecture theater like this, you can still do a lot of active learning. So yeah, I just wanted to model two things for you there. They're quite simple. Inquiry-based learning, starting with questions, because the brain likes that. If you have a question, the brain then starts to look for answers to that question. And the second one is really simple, non-invasive, active learning strategy. Turn to a neighbor and, right? So there are lots of these little things that you can do to make classrooms a little bit more engaging and a little bit more humanizing as well. So can I ask for a couple volunteers who would be willing to share a question that they came in with or something that they really hoped that we could talk about together today? Any volunteers who would be willing to share that? Yes. And I'm going to bring the mic Phil Donahue style because the folks online want to hear too.
Something under my chair. Hi, I'm Kristen Cash. I teach art history at Tacoma Park. I do a ton of experiential learning in person, but I am now distance learning. So my big question is, how do you take some of these same things, like think, pair, share? Think, pair, share is great in person, but how do you translate that into an asynchronous environment?
Great. So that idea of like we're now in a hybrid world, and how do we move from some of these in-person techniques and move them into the online space? Wonderful. Couple others, questions that you came in with today. And welcome folks online to put that in the chat as well. Is it Milton? Okay.
So I was hoping that you would be able to address how to do experiential learning within the context of a mathematics classroom. I think that might be very interesting to some people.
Great. Thank you. Good one. Another. I'm going to go over here.
I'm going to tattle on my friend Maria here, who's teaching math as well. So her question was, how do you take something abstract concept, and make it experiential?
Good. These are all really great ones. And it's just helpful for me, and you can do this as well when you're teaching in class, is to just remember that part of our strategy as educators is to move from theirs to ours to theirs. So what I mean by that is you start in their world. What's on their mind? How are they feeling? What is a question or a challenge, or what is their previous experience with the content? So I always do a pre-class student questionnaire for all of my students. And I ask them things like, what other classes have you taken? Do you have a part-time job? What's family like, if you're willing to share that? What questions do you have? How can I best support you as a learner? And it's just amazing to read those. It helps me remember names and connect names and faces, but it also helps them express who they are as a person and what they're bringing into the classroom space. So theirs is starting in their world, and then the ours is the world we create together, right? The teacher and the student together. And then by the end of the semester or by the end of the class, you're moving back into theirs, which is how do they take what they've learned or what they know or what they've learned how to do, and then how does that connect to other parts of their life, either other parts of the curriculum or new understandings. Oh, did it turn off again? It might have turned off again. Did we lose Andrew? What did he do the last time this happened? This is what happens. Wake up. Did anybody remember what he did? Maybe just press something. Oh no, now what have we done? Here we go. Maybe just doing that will have worked. Good. Okay. Yes. Uncertainty. All right. Really quickly, my journey. I actually started earlier on in my career as an outdoor guide and an outdoor leader, and it informs a lot of things like how we think about working with students and working in teams. My first book was a very academic, high academic sort of theory book about the philosophy of experiential education. If you want to delve into what reading somebody's dissertation looks like, feel free to get that one. And then I really got interested in, as I started working more in the college context, how does this play out in university and college environments? And that was the second book. And then the one that you all have here, where I really landed was folks were getting caught up a lot in sort of terminology and am I doing it right? And is this place-based learning, or is it problem-based learning, or is it community-engaged learning? And I wanted to kind of elevate the conversation to like, what is the dynamic that we're looking for in the classroom? And that's why I started with the Armin story about, starting with that sort of sense of uncertainty and thinking about risk and what would be resourceful and appropriate risk that we're asking our students to do, what is resourceful and appropriate, what I call productive risk that we do as faculty and staff, and how do those things help us create more dynamic learning environments. And here's where I work. Some of you have been there. Warren Wilson College, just on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Just really quickly, a little bit about Warren Wilson. It's a really unique place. It's a small liberal arts school, 4-year degree baccalaureate program that combines work, academics, and community engagement for every student. So it's a work college, one of 11 federally designated work colleges. Every student has a work assignment to help run the college as part of their experience there. And we've integrated experiential learning into every major. So it's not optional, and it's not something students have to pay extra for. They experience it in every major and in a multi-scaffolded way. We start with a community engaged first-year seminar. So every student starts in a 16-person small seminar that is purposefully community engaged with a nonprofit partner in the Buncombe County or Asheville area. In their major, they go through a 2-sequence experiential learning set of courses, and the faculty can choose what methodology they want that experiential learning course to be in. And we'll talk about what methodologies those are in a second. And every student has an internship, field experience, or practicum as part of their major. And then finally, we have a senior capstone experience where all of this is put together. Okay, a little bit for us today, definitions and developments in a part one, another chance for us to do a little reflection, and then we'll talk a little bit more about engaged learning by design. I'll try to weave in the questions that you all have, and if I've forgotten them, you'll remind me. And I hope plenty of time for Q&A today. All right, so here we go. And by the way, I will provide to Kim, this is just a URL, it's on the cloud. And you'll see in a couple points, I've embedded hyperlinks. And so, when I sort of have you should check this out, you can access this presentation and you can click on that hyperlink and it'll go right to an example or another school that has something like it. Just you can use that as a resource. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about decentering education, teaching, and learning today. This is the big paradigm shift that we've been moving our way through, the difference between instruction and learning. And I'll use my favorite little cartoon clip here. I taught Spot how to whistle. I can't hear him whistling. I said I taught him, I didn't say he learned it. Right. And that is really the key paradigmatic shift that we're moving our way through when we think about education. Barr and Tagg were the first ones that really identified this difference between teaching and learning. On the right-hand side, you can think of teaching as lesson plans. It's neat, it's orderly, it's sequential, it's managed, and it's documented. It's the classic teacher joke, which is I designed the perfect syllabus and they sent me the wrong students, right? And then on the right, learning, right? But learning, if you think of it as understanding, is messy, it's spontaneous, it's irregular, it's nonlinear, and it's complex. And so it might suggest to us that there are different ways that we might want to be orienting how our classrooms are situated and how we interact with our students if we're after understanding and not after teaching. And I was just having a conversation with Andrew over here, and he was in an engineering program, and he said the engineers encouraged us to take classes outside of engineering because they were sick and tired of 4.0 engineering students who had never experienced failure before. Because when they got onto the job site and they had a failure, they had no idea what to do with it, right? So that's that messy, spontaneous, irregular. How are we preparing students for that uncertain world that Margaret Wheatley was talking about in that opening quotation? This is Randy Bass. He's at Georgetown, just somewhere around there. And he runs this thing called the Red House, which is like a project to rethink higher education. Really, really interesting guy. And he's done a lot of really interesting writing. Here's one quote from him. And this is from an essay called Disrupting Higher Ed. By disrupting ourselves, I'm asserting, I think that says, that one key source of disruption in higher ed is coming not from the outside, but from our own practices, from a growing body of experiential modes of learning, moving from margin to center, proving to be critical and powerful to the overall quality and meaning of the undergraduate experience. As a result, at colleges and universities, we're running headlong into our own structures, into the way we do business. And so an example of that is an internship. Right? These can tie us into knots. Is the internship, well, for us in the sort of small liberal arts school world where we stop in the summer. I know you all don't stop in the summer, but when you do, and yet the internship's in the summer and the registrar's freaking out and everybody's like, who is the instructor of record? How are we getting this into the system of record? Who's grading it? How much hours? What is happening? It just creates this entire cascading effect of like, we're not set up for this. And yet we know that internships are one of the most powerful learning experiences a student can have in 4 years. And yet our whole system and structure isn't set up for most of us to manage it. And so he talks about it as the formal curriculum on the inside, and on the outside of this are all these other things happening. And that's high impact practice work, experiential co-curricula, the participatory culture that happens in higher ed, and the informal learning that our students pick up in all sorts of different spaces and places. But traditionally, we've said, no, 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 none of that stuff is learning, right? We don't count that. I don't care, student life personnel, that, you know, you might have your curriculum over here, but we don't really count it as well as much. And yet we're getting lots of feedback that this is some of the places where students are getting the most profound kind of learning. So he's sort of asking us, what do we do with that? So what are some of these areas? Career development, cooperatives, internships, job shadowing. We can think about global education, year, semester study abroads, January, May terms, service experiences of various shapes and sizes. We have undergraduate research, the CURES, the community engaged research, and the REUs. Those, by the way, are all examples from different campuses. This is a hyperlink that you can click on to learn more about those. We have co-curricular learning, as I mentioned, with like the work that's done in student development, living and learning communities, first-year experiences. The work study program, Iowa Grow, is a really interesting way that they're trying to make more meaning out of the work study experience. Civic education, service learning, student activism, which, oh boy, student activism right now. Just came off of a call this morning about that. Pedagogical experimentations, team-based cooperative learning, flipped classrooms, gamification, and simulations. Folks familiar with reacting to the past? Really, really interesting. If you are in history, this is out of Barnard College, and they basically have these entire role plays that are very sophisticated that take place over the entire semester around certain key historical events. And you want to talk about students engaged in history, they are playing it out in a game where they're trying to win. And believe it or not, that gets them very invested. And there's a whole pedagogy around reacting to the past. Really, really interesting. Online. Virtual service learning, that's a link right there. And you can find out more about people who are now playing around with this idea of like, hey, you don't actually have to be in person to do service learning. What would it look like to create and scaffold in service learning that happens asynchronously and not at the same time and in person? This is a Google Ngram, which tracks the prevalence of a word over time in print. And this is super fun. You can go do this on just about any word. It's really interesting. But I, of course, plugged in experiential learning. And you can see there that, holy buckets, what the heck happened round about 1960, then where this really started to take hold. There's a little blip there. If we drilled in, you could see it better. But this, of course, is the progressive era. The early progressive era. And then if you're an educational historian, you know that round about in the 60s, we had a resurgence of that. But it is interesting to see how much it has grown over time. Which leads me to a reflection. You all ready for this? Here we go. What do you think explains the rise in interest? And of all of these things that are out there, whether it's undergraduate research or study abroad or service learning or the reacting to the past that I just said, what do these methods have in common? And if you say they're all experiential, that's not what I'm looking for, right? So, yeah.
I think it makes the student feel smarter when they're looking at problems, considering kind of the multiple inputs, and they feel like detectives or doctors, like they're Dr. House or whatever. And they actually feel confident that not only do they know, what they memorized about a class, but how to use it.
That's wonderful. Are folks familiar with StrengthsFinder here as an overall? Yeah. So that, you kind of go through a little survey and it tells you what your strengths are. We had a StrengthsFinder trainer at Warren Wilson last semester. And one of the interesting things he said that I'd never really thought of before is how we define a strength. And what he said was in StrengthsFinder research, they define a strength as something you feel strong while you're doing it. Right? A strength is something that makes you feel strong while you're doing it. which is really interesting, right? That's a very different way of thinking about it, very positive psychology based. So if we can create more learning environments where students can feel strong while they're doing it, that's where the good stuff is. Okay, great one. Other folks, what explains the rise in interest, or what do you feel like these methods have in common?
I think one thing that might be driving it is all the attention on the student loan debt and whether or not it's worth it and whether or not it leads to um, a job, a meaningful job, or a job where you can actually get paid. And so you see things that are actually appear to be preparing you for work. Maybe that speaks to some people.
We've all heard it, right? What does this have to do with anything? You know, and so we can translate that maybe negatively as, geez, I wish our students were more interested in learning for learning's sake. Or we could ask ourselves, the brain is designed to seek relevance in whatever it is it's doing. So if the student is asking for that relevance, how are we responding to it? Here's another little tricky one that I learned over time. Students are always turned into the same radio station. It's WIIFM. And that stands for what's in it for me, right? So the WIFM. So when I'm planning a class or I'm planning a semester even, I might think about, am I answering the WIFM for my students? Like, what's in it for me? And trying to be as overt as possible about that. Okay, couple more. Either what explains the rise, or what do these things have in common?
Could use my teacher voice. I was thinking that as this kind of began rising in the 1960s, as college access became broader, and we understand more about how people learn, and we understand that learning by doing, kind of reinforces that. As you have many different kinds of people with different learning styles and different expectations going to college, I think that may appeal to people and to educators as we try to give people lots of different ways of learning and reinforcing, and showing them why something's significant.
Great. I don't need to add to that. That's perfect. Okay. What did I do with my clicker? Here it is. Okay. So let's dive in a little bit into this. What is experiential education? When I give talks at campuses, I really like to emphasize this, even if for some of you it might be old hat, because one of the things that I know Montgomery College is exploring and is interested in is this general education structure and the ways in which experiential learning might start to feed into it. And a key thing for campuses is common understanding, shared language. It doesn't mean that you have to have it. There's not like you pluck out of thin air, this is the only way to do experiential learning or the only way to frame it. It just means, what does it mean for Montgomery College? And so I would encourage you as you go down this journey to say, what is experiential learning for us, right? For us, how do we want to shape it? How does it speak to the needs of our students? So this is really a journey, this next couple of slides, to help you see the discourse and then figure out for yourselves how you want to make it yours. Okay. This is a quick little pop quiz that I do with folks, but it's basically, is it experiential learning? You can see there a student-produced drama or play, a small group discussion in class, an internship, a study tour to France, and then I usually have people break out into groups and sort of debate these things. And what do you guess the answer is here to all 10? All of it or none of it, right? Yeah, because it depends. And then let's get into the well, then what are we doing in our brain when we say, well, wait, why would that counter? Why wouldn't it? And we hit the classic Kolb experiential learning cycle. So this is well, documented over time, and it's this idea of having a concrete experience, so doing something, learning by doing, reflecting off of that experience. And then the abstract conceptualization, what are you concluding or learning from that experience? And then the active experimentation, planning, trying out what you've learned. You can simplify this into the what, so what, now what. I've often framed it like that. I added a little bit of nuance to it because I think the framing of the direct experience is actually really important. So how do we pre-expose the students to the content? and then move them into direct experience. So if you think about a study abroad, we probably wouldn't ever just, get on a plane and go to Denmark and get started, right? We always are trying to do something in a pre-orientation to get students ready for that experience. It's the same thing when you think about in a class. All right, you might spend 2 minutes pre-framing whatever the direct experience is that you're doing in the class. The rest is very similar to Kolb there. Here's a definition, okay, Association for Experiential Learning. And I put the things in bold that for me are important, right? It's a philosophy that informs many methodologies which educators purposely engage with learners in direct experience and focused reflection, right? So those are the key ones for me. It's not a technique, it's a philosophy, it's an approach to teaching and learning. It has lots of methodologies associated with it, but the biggies are direct experience and focused reflection. The why, here's just some, good old fashioned, like the research supports stuff. EL methodologies are more effective than lecturing. That's been pretty well researched. They're more engaging for students. And this is all the high impact practice stuff that we all know really, really well. This is from George Koo's work. Most of these things have at their core some form of experiential practice, part of it. They're more inclusive and they enable student success. So one of the follow-on pieces of research about HIPS was HIPS for underrepresented student populations. And it turns out that if underrepresented students experience HIPS, they have a disproportionately positive benefit to their overall 4 years. So while HIPS are great for all students, they are disproportionately beneficial to historically underrepresented students. They're aligned with career readiness and goals. I just pulled this data today. This is a very recent employer survey from NACE. Everybody knows NACE. NACE is the National Association of Careers Employers. Have a look at that, right? So these are the things that they're looking for on a resume. Problem-solving skills, ability to work in a team, communication skills, strong work ethic, flexible, adaptable, communication, verbal. You got to get, well, how many down is that? 1, 2, 3, 6 or 7 before you get to a technical skill, right? So when you think about when we are putting students in internships, when we're asking them to do group work, when we are creating more interactive and uncertain environments for them, we are building some of the capacity of our students to be able to demonstrate these aptitudes. Here's another interesting one from NACE. Look at that. The percentage of candidates getting screened by GPA over time. Look at how that's dropped, right? So I think this is an overall trend line that we're seeing where it's, I say this to my students all the time, an employer's not really going to care much about your GPA. They want to know what you can do, right? Tell me what you can do. Tell me how you can demonstrate that you work well in teams, right? And that's not going to show up in a GPA because, as Randy Bass said, our institutional structures are designed based on a 1,500-year-old model of teaching and learning, right?
I don't want to get distracted by this, but I wonder if grade inflation has something also to do with where people say it doesn't really matter because it's all baloney anyhow. So let's see what they can do.
Yes, I think there's probably some of that as well. I mean, we've experienced it at Warren Wilson. Just the other day, I was like looking at our honors list and I'm like, are there really that many students who are graduating Phi Beta Kappa? It seems like a lot of students. Okay. Another one from the research, EL methodologies have a lasting impact on overall student life preparedness and well-being, right? So we're not graduating students necessarily to just be captains of industry and make a lot of money, although that's not a bad thing. But we also want to have graduate students who are citizens of the world that can view the work that they're doing in the world as meaningful in their life. And so this is the Gallup poll, Big Six. Raise your hand if you're familiar with this one. Ooh, goody. This one's good. This is good stuff. So what Gallup did is a huge data set, and they went and found recent graduates in jobs where they were reporting that they found their jobs meaningful, that they liked what they did. And then they asked them a series of questions to say, tell me about your undergraduate experience. Okay. And here were the correlations that they found. So these are the folks that were saying, I find my work meaningful. So they said, I had a professor who excited me about learning. I had professors who cared about me as a person. And I had a mentor who helped me pursue my goals and dreams, right? This is the classic relational side that we know is so important, whether it's in the community college system or in other college and university systems. Then they said these three. I worked on a project that took a semester or more to complete. Interesting, right? I had an internship or a job that allowed me to apply my learning. And I was extremely active in extracurricular activities and organizations. So Gallup calls these the big six. And can you guess how many students reported in this huge data set experiencing all six of these in their undergraduate career? Less than 10? 3%, right? So this is something we can design for y'all. Like we can do this. We can do this together across both the academic faculty and the staff. How do we work together to have those big six happening for more of our students, right? 3%, we can do way better than that. So it's a really interesting data if you want to dig into that one a little bit more. Okay, and then the last thing just on this labeling of shared language with experiential learning, some misconceptions. That EL is the only or the best way to learn. It's an approach. It can work in certain environments really, really well. I think it can work in all environments. There's not a single discipline or division where I don't think it can work. But again, I'm not suggesting that only folks who do this are teaching well, okay? It only involves activity outside the classroom. There are tons of examples of really good, strong experiential learning that happens even in an environment like this. Lecture-based courses can't be experiential. I like to use the phrase direct instruction because I think when we hear the word lecture, we have this weird thing that goes on in our heads. And so what I'm doing right now is very didactic. It's direct instruction. There's nothing inherently wrong with direct instruction. How is it fitting into your overall classroom dynamic? Where is direct instruction appropriate? Where might you do more active learning, right? So we're just trying to break out of these false dichotomies that I'm either an experiential teacher or I lecture. It's not an either or. It's really a question of what's most appropriate for your context. And that, you know, online courses can't be experiential. There's a classic one, or experiential learning is only relevant in applied or pre-professional fields or disciplines. I've seen it in everything from philosophy and history to English and everything in between. So let's get to some brass tacks. So I organized the experiential universe into 4 methodologies. Please don't get caught up on the, you know, well, what are the boundaries between them and all the things? It's just one way to conceptualize it so people have something to hang on to. Active learning. So active learning is the kind of stuff that you typically see in the classroom, flipped classrooms, think paired shares, small group work, team-based learning, inquiry-based learning. Those all fit into that bucket of active learning strategies that we can do with our students, whether it's 10 students in a class or 200. Project and problem-based learning is a classic one where you might have a particular thing that you're working on, like, hey, students, let's research the viability of putting solar panels on Science West building. Maybe they're already here. There's a living roof, I know that, right? And then you spend the semester working on that project, right? What else we have? Community-based learning, just as it sounds, right? It's taking the campus and engaging with a community partner of some kind in a reciprocal, meaningful way. That's really key, right? We're not just foisting ourselves onto a struggling nonprofit and making their life harder. We are supposed to be building capacity and helping them with whatever their projects are that they're working on, and we come alongside in a reciprocal partnership with them. And then work integrated learning, whether that's work study, an internship, job shadowing, practicum, et cetera. So really 4 core methodologies when we talk about what happens with experiential learning in higher ed. They typically fall into those 4 buckets. I call it the ecosystem of experiential learning, and you can see them all laid out there with some specific examples of it. What are the common features? Risk and uncertainty, we've been talking about that. Relevance, student agency, and by design, right? So when we do experiential learning, it's by design, it's not by accident. And so we are purposefully thinking about curating and designing these kinds of things. So if you are just having students playing pickup basketball, they might even be learning by doing at some level, but it's not experiential education because it hasn't been pre-framed. We haven't purposefully designed it with a clear idea of what the learning outcomes are, and we haven't had focused reflection post the experience. So, and then I'll leave you this one. This one is actually an AA. We were talking about AAC and U. This is a great AAC and U quote. The world is full of complex, unscripted problems where the answers are not immediately known and the consequences matter. Right. And that is certainly what we're in right now. And so the question I think for us as educators is, how are we preparing students for this world? Are we preparing them for a culture of one right answer? I don't think that's really a good idea. Anybody have the one right answer for the Palestinian conflict? I don't. Right. So how do we have them wrestling with ambiguity and knowing that that's okay? And that that's what part of being a human being is in the world? And that the consequences matter. So we're not just about debating it ad nauseum. We actually still have to act in the world in a variety of ways. Okay, that was part one. That wasn't too bad, was it? Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about some examples and models and how we move beyond the classroom to think about this at curricular design scales, and how do we know if we're doing it well and what are the challenges. I want to pause there. Are there things that bubble up for you, either questions, reactions, comments, emotional outbursts? It's Friday afternoon, any of the above. And online too, if folks have comments, feel free to bring those in. Yes, Jen is monitoring it, being a good steward of that. Okay, then here we go. Part two. So we're going to talk about design principles. How do we design this? And I think the first and most important thing to start with is scale. We need to think about scale. There's a micro, a meso, and a macro scale. Okay, at the macro level, you might think about how do we design 2 years of a student's education at Montgomery College? So the example here, which is hyperlinked, is Worcester Polytechnic. Anybody familiar with Worcester Polytechnic? Couple. Really cool how they do this at a macro scale. So they call themselves a project-based learning school. Every student there experiences a scaffolded sequence of project-based learning starting their first year, moving all the way up to their senior year. They're an engineering liberal arts school, but by the time those students are seniors, they've already worked on an increasing level of very complex projects in their 4 years. And their senior capstone is embedded with a company doing a project for that company. Really, really interesting how they do that. But that's designing experiential learning at a macro scale. It's thinking about the entire college experience and where do we slot in and develop these capacities in our students. A mesoscale might be thinking about just the senior capstone. So this example comes from when I was department chair of environmental studies at a previous institution. So there's this really cool model out of Oregon called the Sustainable Cities Initiative. And the way it works is the university invites towns from all over the state of Oregon to apply to be the sustainable city for the year. And if the town gets accepted, the university organizes 60 graduate courses to help that town figure out various projects related to sustainability that the town themselves have lifted up. And so basically the university brings itself to bear, all of its intellectual weight, all of its talent, all of its resources to help this town figure out some key sustainability challenges. I mean, how cool is that as a design? And then at the end of the year, they have this big presentation where the students present on their research and the town's out. And it's anyway, so I went to a presentation about it. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. So my college was in this teeny little town in Indiana called Richmond, Indiana. And what we did is we worked with the local government and we created a mini version of Sustainable Cities for our senior environmental capstone. So city officials would come to class in the fall and they would pitch ideas to our seniors and say, well, we really could use some help on this, on this, on this, on this. And it became kind of like Shark Tank, right? The students would ask questions like, well, what would we be doing if we did that? Or da, 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 da. And then the city officials would leave and they would deliberate and pick their project. And the year that I was overseeing this, they picked a playground. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Like I was thinking it wasn't intellectual enough. It was a playground for sensory processing disorder students. And over the course of that year, because remember, projects that took more than a semester to complete, I became the errand boy for that class. They were like, Jay, we need to understand what SketchUp Pro is because we've got to design the playground and we need to use computer-aided design. Can you go ask the library if we have a license for it? Sure. Right. Next week, Jay, we got to fundraise for this thing and we don't know how to fundraise. Can you go ask the vice president of advancement to come and give us a talk about how to fund? Sure. No. Right. Jay, we have to write an MOU. Can you go ask the business faculty what it's like to write an MOU and to do a request for bids? Because we've got to get these playgrounds. That's what I did the whole time. And they are running and doing these projects. That group turned what I thought was a really relatively silly thing, right? Design a playground. They designed it. They fundraised $200,000 for this playground. And they put it in, the city put it in the summer. And these students all came back in the fall for the grand opening of this playground, which was the only one of its kind in a 100-mile radius. And then I got a call from the president like 3 weeks later, and he said, I need you in my office. I'm like, I am in so much trouble. And I go, and he said, I just got a letter from a parent, and he read it to me. And it was some version of, I have tears in my eyes as I'm writing this because my kid has a playground where he can play and I don't have to worry about him running away. And so the president was like, I don't know what you did, but just keep doing it. So we've designed now that every senior capstone works with the city on an action-based research project. And that is just part of the way we've run the major in environmental studies. So that's an example of something at the meso scale, not the whole institution, but something that's more than just what you do in the classroom, right? And so just a really basic example of a classroom active learning strategy is Fishbowl. You might have students coming in having read a text, and you put a group of students in the middle and a group of students on the outside, and you drop in a question to the group of students in the middle, and they talk about it while the group on the outside listens. And then you pause and you say, group on the outside, do you have additional comments or questions for the group in the middle? Right. And you do that for a while and then you switch it out and another group comes into the fishbowl and the rest of the folks are on the outside. Right. So that's just at a micro level how you might do something active learning based at the classroom. So think about with experiential learning for Montgomery, where are we at? Do we want to do macro, which might be general education, meso at the level of the department, micro, right? Something small that I could do in my classroom that I think could make a real difference. Here's a model that you can use. I call it Eel Dr. C. And again, this can be done at any scale. You can do this for a 50-minute class. You can do it for 2 years. So E stands for enroll. We've already talked about that. The importance of framing. How are you inviting the students into the learning? E is experience, right? So that's that direct, messy, concrete experience where they have to sort of try to figure it out. John Dewey called it loose parts play, right? So how do you look around? You're like, I don't know, let's just try to put these things together, or what else do we need, right? So you want that kind of orientation to the learning. L stands for label, punctuated direct instruction or content. D stands for demonstrate. How are the students demonstrating that they have begun to learn and understand the new thing that you've just been trying to teach them? R is review, multiple opportunities for feedback and reflection. And then C is connect, on ramping to other experiences. So you can EEL Dr. C a class where you might say, okay, what is the enroll that I'm doing for this class? You could EEL Dr. C 4 years. You could EEL Dr. C a semester study abroad, right? You just kind of think your way through each of those component pieces and how you might incorporate them. So I'll give you a specific example, Tragedy of the Commons. And this may relate to the how do you do something abstract and conceptual. So environmentalists in the room, Tragedy of the Commons, Garrett Hardin, some folks, right? It's this idea that when things aren't owned, by a single entity, they tend to get abused by all of the folks that are using it, because like, well, nobody owns it, so we can all just trash it. So we were exploring this in class. I did a simulation called The Harvest. So I started, here was my frame. I said to students, hey, how many of you are familiar with this idea of the commons? Like something that is owned by everybody, but therefore owned by no one. Students are looking at me, 8:30 in the morning. Anybody have an example of one? Student raise their hand. Library. Ooh, that's pretty good. Yeah, I think a library is a kind of a commons. Anyone else? Air. Great. Yeah, that's a great one. Like who owns the air, right? Anybody else? The internet. Ooh, what do we think about that? Is the internet a commons, right? Pause, right? So that's all I did. That's all the framing. Boom, get them into groups. They are all fishing boat fleet captains. And they run through this simulation where they are putting in their bids for the amount of fish they want over the course of a fishing season. And they get feedback every time they go through a round about how many fish they get back. But they don't know how the other fishing captains are doing. And this is a game that is set up for failure because it only takes about 5 generations and they've completely fished it out. And they all are like, wait, what? Like, how did that happen? And the smart ones sometimes will go running over to another fishing fleet and say, hey, let's work together. How many are you bringing in, right? So they try to cooperate, but the system, capitalism, is set up, right, to not allow them to work together. So then we do all of that. And then we debrief it, like what went on? I have no idea what they were doing over there. And why didn't somebody tell me that the rules were? And I didn't understand that there weren't as many fish in the sea, da, 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 da. So we go through that whole thing. And then I do the label. Hey, there's this dude, right? Garrett Hardin. He has this concept, tragedy of the commons. This is what it is. This is how it's influenced environmental thinking. And what do we think about it? And where do we think the problems associated with it are? And boom, there's your class, right? So it was an EEL Dr. C class, 55 minutes. I did not start with saying, good morning, students. I'd like to talk to you about the tragedy of the commons, PowerPoint click, right? And that's just an example of how you can do this at the classroom level and have it be active and experiential. So here are the best practices. Purposeful, we've talked about this before, carefully chosen. We have to think of ourselves as curators of experience. When you go to a museum, right, they don't just throw random stuff on the wall. They've thought about it, right? They thought about how you experience that exhibit. We as teachers need to think about this the same way. Active. So what does active learning even mean? Okay, posing questions, they're investigating, they're experimenting, they're being curious, they're trying to solve problems, and they're assuming responsibility. Unpredictable. This is really a big part of what I write about in the book, right? The educator and the learner experience success, failure, and uncertainty because the outcomes can't be totally predicted. I had no idea what they were going to do with this playground project. It could have fallen on its face. And I would have had to have made good learning out of that the best that I could. So in my theater background days, this is always what happens when you're directing a show, right? You're like, oh my God, this is going to be horrible, right? And somehow, eventually, it all comes together, right? In some way, shape, or form. So we have to be more ready for that and more ready to lose control a little bit of our classrooms, maybe. Collaborative. Right. So there again, we are working with them. Jay as the errand boy for the senior seminar is a good example of that. Integrated. This one's key, right? Making sure that we're integrating and we're aligning with learning outcomes. We're not just doing for doing's sake. We're doing it with a very purposeful plan in mind. So I'll give you one very specific example of that. Again, University of Alabama, I was working with a faculty member. She said, oh, all my classes are experiential. I'm like, great. Like, can you give me an example of one? She's like, sure. You know, I'm in psychology. And so the students, they do this community service project where they all have to go out to the animal shelter and play with the animals. And I was like, okay, so how does that connect to the psychology class? Well, I want them to practice journaling. So they journal how they're feeling as they're playing with the animals. And there wasn't much else there. And I said, well, how's that going? Like, reading those journal entries is brutal. They're like so boring. right? And so I worked with her to sort of say like that the students can't see the relevance and the connection to the learning outcome there. So they're just writing vacuous reflections that they think you want to hear. And let's try to get something going that's a little bit more interesting. And what she redesigned was how can we work with that animal shelter to create an ad campaign based on psychological theories that would have more people clicking onto the website to see what animals were up for adoption. See the difference? Like just making sure it's connecting to those learning outcomes and making it more concrete and relevant. Okay, common traps and responses. Doing more, not doing different. This is a key one. I hear a lot from faculty who say, Jay, it sounds great, this experiential stuff, but like, I've just got way too much content to do. I can't. And folks, if you asked a student a year after they took your class, what they remember from your class, how confident are you of how much they're going to be able to say, right? Think again about like, what is it that I want them to say a year after I took the class? Those are the enduring understandings, right? That we're going to talk about in a second. But just in case, this is from the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, kind of a big deal, STEM people, right? As biology faculty, we need to put the depth versus breadth debate behind us. So the biology faculty themselves are saying, we can't cover this. Stop trying to cover. Right? We want to uncover. How do we uncover, not cover? Plus, we've got the Google. So we really need to think about what it is we are teaching in our classrooms. So this is Wiggins and McTee, Understanding by Design. Think about uncoverage, think about less is more. And understanding by design is all about enduring understandings. So when you think about your discipline, your class, and you say, I meet Jose a year after my class, and he catches me in the library and he says, Dr. So-and-so, you know, I'm so glad I bumped into you because I can't stop thinking about what? Teach to that, right? Teach to that. And then this is just backwards design, right? So classic thing of like you say, okay, here's that enduring understanding, and then you're going to design backwards to ensure that students are demonstrating that by the end of the semester. And starting that way, backwards and then forwards, keeps you from piling on, and designing a syllabus with too much content. Okay, another trap is insufficient integration. We just talked about this, but edutainment, activity for activity's sake, or the inoculation effect, right? And so some colleges are very proud. We require every student to do a thing, right? Sometimes that's not really great because all you've done is just kind of pinch pointed students into a class on X, but do we really know that they've taken anything away from that? So that's the inoculation effect. Shoot them up and hope it takes, right? That's what that's about. So instead, this is from Fink, Integrated Course Design, making sure that our teaching and learning activities and our learning goals and our feedback and assessment are all speaking to each other. Right? And these are all linked in there, by the way, if you want them. And then curriculum mapping. This is pretty standard. I think hopefully folks are somewhat familiar with curriculum mapping, but just thinking about what those student learning outcomes are, knowledge, skills, and aptitudes. Where in your curriculum are they introduced? Where are they reinforced? And where are they emphasized? So really trying to make sure we're tying in activity, learning by doing, with outcomes. Lack of structure. This one's been emerging more recently, and I think it's really interesting. This just came out, I think 2019. Despite active learning being recognized as a superior method of instruction in the classroom, a major recent study found that they still used traditional teaching methods. Comparing passive lectures with active learning using a randomized experimental approach, we find that students in the active classroom learn more, but they feel like they're learning less. Fascinating. We show that this negative correlation is caused in part by the increased cognitive effort required during active learning. So folks, you know, culture of one right answer, culture of like, I have been asked to do this thing, memorize it and spit it out, and they feel like that's learning. And it's not, right? But then when you do active learning, they're like, I'm confused. I don't understand. This is hard. What does the professor want? Right? All of a sudden, they don't think they're learning, but they're actually learning a whole lot more. And then another one for us administrator types in the room, this can also mean faculty get worse student evaluations. So we've got to watch out for that because they're trying, the faculty members really trying to create that messy learning environment. And yet the students will say things like, I didn't know what the professor expected, you know, things were disorganized, whatever it happens to be. So we've got to make sure that we understand that students sometimes this isn't comfortable for them. They would much prefer sitting and getting lectured at sometimes. So this is what they say. It's confusing, it's too much work, and I want to learn by myself. I don't want to learn in a team. Well, guess what? When you go out into the work world, you're never going to be working by yourself, probably. So instead, do you guys know about TILT, transparency in learning and teaching? It just is just what it sounds like. Hey, everybody, today we're doing the harvest simulation, right? You're going to be working in teams. Teamwork is a really important part of learning and right? You just make it overt. Make it overt, make it overt. Because students get frustrated when they feel like you're playing games when we should be doing work, right? So just gotta really make it clear. And then the last one, shallow assessment. And this is from Kathy Davidson. Do y'all know, we don't think very much about this, but A, B, C, D, F. Anybody ever wonder what happened to E? Right? I mean, this is a classic example of like, we just swim in the water. We don't notice it. So the grading system was developed first by the faculty at Mount Holyoke up in Massachusetts. And they were like, okay, A, B, C, D, E. No, E doesn't work. E might stand for excellent. So we need something else. We need how about what is French for fail? Oh, there's another one though. At least Kathy says there is one. Failure? No, Kathy's wrong. She wrote it in her book that they chose a French word for failure and it started with an F. And so that's where they got the F from, supposedly. Yeah. So it's just interesting that I don't know what the ABCDF is about. Does anybody else know what it's about? I mean, why do we have letters? Because we decided to have letters. And then to make it really insulting, the meat packing industry said, that's a great way to rate things. And they used it to rate meat. And we haven't changed it ever since then, right? So this ungrading, some folks may be familiar with ungrading. That's become a thing. I don't know how much of a thing it's going to become, but with grade inflation, we may be sort of moving our way into that space anyway, of being less interested in a grade and more interested in what a student can demonstrate that they've learned, or even better, what a student has demonstrated they've improved on, right, over the course. So the Texas model, which is the sit, get, spit, and forget, right? Stakes are too high. And then you've got the vacuous reflection, the stakes are too low. My daughter is at a college, she's in bio, she's pre-veterinary medicine, and the faculty member there, to ensure that no lecture time is lost, assigns a high stake test from 7 to 9:30 at night, 3 times in the semester, right, for these students. And my daughter texts me and she's like, they're all crying again, right? Because the students exit the exam in tears. They're exhausted. They've been in class all day, and then they have to come back and take an exam from 7 to 9:30 at night. Why are we doing this? Yeah, so there might be a note to a dean somewhere in my future, but garbage in, garbage out, right? If you do that. So what do we do instead? We think about formative versus summative assessment, focusing more on formative assessment. This is assessment for learning, right? Summative assessment, assessment of learning. When we get out into the work world, we're going to have a lot of that assessment for learning, right? And a lot less of the summative. Rubrics, metacognition, focusing on like, how are you thinking about your thinking? Anybody familiar with exam wrappers? So as my understanding of exam wrappers, because I've never used them before, but basically the student takes the exam and then you have an extra question that's like, tell me how you studied for this exam, what you expected in terms of your performance and how you think you did. Right? Metacognition, like let's think about your thinking, and then they actually assign points to that as part of their overall exam. It's demonstrated to really improve a student's ability to know more about their own learning. Give ownership and choice. I often talk about bounded choice in classes. So if there's a project, can we give them 3 different things that they can do and they get to choose one? You can do a video blog, you can do a written essay, or you can do a poster presentation. Give them choice, and then they start to own that choice. And then authentic audience. This is my favorite one. Students will care a whole lot more if they're presenting their information to somebody besides you. So when we do the environmental senior capstone, those students are presenting it back to the city officials. And boy, oh boy, do they care about that, right? It becomes something that they really want to do well with, rather than this is just an assignment my faculty member has required me to do. So can we create more environments with authentic assessment? They don't always have to be outside partners. They could be seniors, freshmen presenting to seniors. They could be seniors presenting to freshmen, right? Different peers, right? Different faculty from other parts of the college. Just think about, is there some other audience that could have a stake in whatever is the students are doing? We made it. I think it's so tired. There it is. Okay. So I started with a story. I'm going to finish with a story. These are some of my students with some dude. Don't know who that is. So when I became an administrator type, we created this Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And the director of that came to me and he said, Jay, I'd like to do this thing called the Holt Prize. And I said, what is it? He said, it's the world's largest competition for social good. And they throw out a problem, and then students from all over the world try to solve for it. And it's like a spelling bee. So they moved their way through a pitch contest, and the winning team gets $1 million. The second place team, goose egg, nothing. So I was at Earlham College, 1,200 students in the middle of Indiana, and this team got together with Gene, the director. And the problem that year in 2016 was double the income of people in a urban dense environment, right? So double the income of 2 million people living in a dense, urban, developing world environment. That's it, right? So this is classic, like, wicked problem. Y'all figure it out, deal with the uncertainty. So the students, one of whom was from Nairobi, she recognized that there was an inefficiency in the bus delivery system. So there were in these working class regions, there was no public transportation. And so folks would have to wait to go to work and just hope that one of these kind of like minivans would come by, and then they'd jump on. And the drivers of the minivans would just kind of chaotically drive all over the place trying to find riders. And this team worked on this thing. This is before smartphones, that with a simple text messaging system, it was kind of like Uber for buses, that they could link passengers and riders or drivers together more efficiently. Then they did the math with the econ faculty, and they figured out that they could double the income of 2 million people if this was adopted globally, basically. And so I started paying attention as an associate dean when they won like the regional competition and they went to the national competition. Again, this is a global competition. And we were like, holy crap, this is great. Like, these students is amazing. They won the national competition. Okay. They were in DC. We were all watching live in 2016. And Bill Clinton got up there and he said, the winner of the 2016 Holt Prize is Earlham College. So, yeah. So these 4 students, and they are now in Kenya. It's called Boo Pass, and they were given $1 million to put this in place, and they've been there working on this project since then. Now, here's the kicker. No academic credit. Wasn't in a single class, right? And boy, were they invested the whole time. All the way through. They worked harder on this than probably anything they've done in their life. And it doesn't even matter if they won the thing, right? It's more about the fact that, think about that learning environment. Students who are going after something that they find meaningful and relevant, working with faculty and staff, and together as a team, driving towards a big idea that they want to see happen in the world. That's what our students want. They want this. They want to make the world a better place. They see a world of wounds and we are not creating the learning environments that help them see how they can make a difference as much as we could. So that's the opportunity that's in front of us. And I really appreciate you all dedicating your Friday afternoon to thinking about how we can do this more for our students and together, because looking around at your students, who I haven't had a chance to meet, but I just am watching, the potential here is amazing. It's amazing. And thank you for the work that you do on behalf of our country for these amazing students that are here to make the world a better place. So with that, thank you very much. Okay, so it's 3:20, and I think you all probably want to get out of here at some point, but would be happy to take some comments, questions, either from the online space or here. And Jen, I'll let you be the jail keeper and when you get folks to break out for their weekend. Sound good?
Sounds good. I just wanted to share what everybody's saying online. At the initial start is we have about 15 people, I think about 17 people were online total, but talking about how to do experiential learning in Zoom classes, biology classes, math classes, and AI with experiential learning. So I'm just
Jeez, yeah.
curious if everybody online had gotten their questions and thoughts, and maybe you want to talk about AI a little bit.
It's so new that I'm just trying to catch up with virtual service learning. Like the AI stuff. The one thing I can say, we talked a little bit about at lunch, is breaking out of the gatekeeper of change as teachers. Folks, like I remember when I was freaking out that my students were using Wikipedia and Google, and I kept telling them there was this thing called the stacks they were supposed to walk through. We lost that. And I don't think it's a horrible thing, right? I mean, it's just search and research is different now than it was in 1996. So I think what I've been impressed with in the AI space is faculty that are using it. Right. So if I had one general education requirement, it would be critical digital media literacy. That's it. Sorry, math people and everyone else. But because I think it's the greatest threat to democracy that we have right now is the ability to understand what information is being fed to me and why. So how about we go there? And so if we're writing an essay, we said, okay, this is an essay on Chaucer. Everybody use AI, go nuts, right? And then you bring it in and you say, like, how do you make this your own, right? Can we see errors in this? In what ways did they actually not get correct the critical things that we should be talking about around Chaucer, around whatever the thing is? So I think the more we can bring technology alongside and use it as a partner and an ally and not as a gatekeeper, you can't touch this thing. How many times does that work with students? Don't touch this really cool thing over here that could help you, right? I don't think that works really well. So I've been finding myself more drawn to less plagiarism police and more how do we work with it and how do we get our students to understand the possibilities and limitations associated with it. So how that is with experiential learning, not so much. I don't know with that. But then also with the STEM, we talked a little bit about math and bio came up there. POGIL, which I referenced in the talk, I think is one really good way that's an entree for STEM folks. And don't ask me what the acronym stands for, but it's team-based learning. So where I first learned of it, I walked into a biology classroom to observe you were observing somebody today, because this younger faculty member wanted me to observe her class because she knew I was an experiential person, and she was getting criticized from her department for being too loud and being too disorganized, right? And so I'm like, okay, let me just see what's going on in the classroom. And they were doing who's a biologist? Can I lie? Okay, so help me out if I get this wrong. They're doing cladiograms, okay, which are like family trees, basically. And it was in a team-based environment. And she said, this species relates to this species, and you could draw it in a bunch of different ways. How would you draw it, the relationship? And the students are all in teams, and they're like, well, they're doing all the things. And then after about 15 minutes, she said, okay, let's see what people, well, we put the cladiogram like this because we think this morphology connects to this and this way. I'm not a biologist. And that was the whole class, right? Was just the, so here's the thing. Deb Meyer said it, teaching is listening, learning is talking. Teaching is listening, learning is talking. So Heather, PhD in biology, knows a ton of stuff, knows enough to know that I need these folks figuring this out. I don't need to tell them what the cladogram is supposed to look like. And she ended it so brilliantly in the class because the students were like, wait a second, Heather. So you're saying it could be drawn either way? And she's like, yes. And that's where the enduring understanding came in. She said, yes. Why could it be drawn either way? And whoa, it was a great class. And I wrote her a very good teacher evaluation. So POGLE, I think is the acronym for that. Asynchronous online learning, way out of my comfort zone here as far as that goes. But a couple of things. So back to my Alabama days, there was a history professor who was teaching an asynchronous online class, and he wanted them to engage in place and engage in something around the civil rights era. And the students were spread out all throughout Alabama. And what he did is he had them work on, this is kind of a hang in there, it's a deep topic, but on church burnings. Because there was not a clear and full record geographically of where all of the church burnings in Alabama had happened from like 1962 all the way up to the present day. And so, he wasn't in class with them, but he scripted out like what he wanted everybody to work on. And then they each did that historical research in the particular place that they were in, and then had that loaded into the Moodle or Blackboard or whatever it happened to be. So that one was one that came to mind as just how might we use a version of like a community-based project that connected to history, but that did not require us to do it synchronously in person altogether. Yeah. Okay.
I have a comment that I want to read from Tim Fahey.
Yeah.
He says, technology in some ways is a one-way street. You can create art, but you can discuss the meaning. You can create video, it can entertain and inform. How do you get feedback? Or Conmingo with the Khan Academy, they have a way to interview historical figures. You can create a dialogue with William Shakespeare. It's a truly interactive experience.
Well said. Yeah. Yeah. Technology is a tool, right? It can do bad things and it can do good things. Our job is to help them figure out which is which. Yeah. What else? Yes. Yes, yes, I can. This is like one of my favorite topics. So there's, I think her name is Teresa Hudson, Teaching What You Don't Know. A great book. And so I read that, and it just so resonated with me because I've led a lot of study abroads. And when you lead a study abroad, you're not. I mean, so a semester in New Zealand, I was learning right alongside the students. And I talk about it in Risky Teaching, biology again. I'm trying to like keep up with the natural history because like I had lots of biologists on the trip, and we were looking at a hebe, which is a certain type of bush, I think. And so we were on a walk, and there was a naturalist that was with us. So it wasn't just the idiot, Jay. But I was trailing behind with some students, and I was trying to be a good teacher, and I'm like, look, students, a hebe, right? And the student who's a biology major, she's like, that's not a hebe. So, we can react to that in various ways as faculty. And I'm like, teach me. Why isn't that a hebe? I thought for sure that was a hebe, right? And that's okay, I think. And now, is that great when you are like teaching your very specific discipline and you are, a math instructor? Maybe there are times when you don't want to look like you're an idiot all the time, but thinking about when and where it's totally appropriate to be in a learning space with your students and to model that with them. So a couple examples, if you haven't seen it, My Shadow Syllabus, Google it. I think it's Sandra Huber, Huber. I use it at the beginning of every class when I teach. It's this wonderful like expose of a syllabus of her saying, like, admitting things like, I get nervous every time when I teach, you know, and when you all look bored, I start to question my value as it's just really wonderful. And I go through with students, I'm like, circle things that resonate with you. And then that's the first thing we do as a class together is they'll circle a thing that says, it's not about the A's. I know you think it's about the A's, but it's not about the A's. And we have this really interesting discussion. It's like it's peeled back the veil of the performance of teaching and learning. So look at it. It might resonate with you. It might not. There's some swear words in there, just to let you know. But yeah, I think anything that we can do to model that learning is messy. I've seen some folks also talk about before research projects, the faculty member saying, let me tell you about this one research project that just was a horrible failure. Right. And just so being clear to them that you are not perfect helps them not be perfect as well. Yeah. The witching hour, everybody. All right. I'm famous at Warren Wilson for ending with poems. So we're gonna end with a poem. I hope that's okay with you. Yeah. This is Wendell Berry, and it's called The Real Work. It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey. The mind that is not baffled is not employed. The impeded stream is the one that sings. So thanks you all for doing the real work with me, and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much from coming all the way from North Carolina. You get a water bottle from MC to take back with you. I'll make sure I'm in the square. I'm not sure if people can see me online, but thank you everybody. Virtually, online, we're coming back in person. And guess what we're gonna start seeing in general education? Experiential learning. So this is a great resource. We're going to have it posted on our website, and all the links in the PowerPoint will be available to you. So be thinking about how you're doing experiential learning in your classroom. What does it mean to teach? What are you already doing? And then how can you change and make it tweak it a little bit different, you know? And so that's what I really want everybody to take away from this. And thank you so much for coming. Also, I want to thank the General Education Standing Committee. Everybody's doing a great job on the committee. So make sure you grab a book. I had your book holding it next week. However, there's books here. So please grab one, and Dr. J. Roberts is going to sign it for you. So we'll have some time to communicate and talk with him. There are still refreshments outside, so grab those, and then you can enjoy this time. Thank you so much.